Bringing you Israel-Hamas update. South African members of parliament have voted to close the Israeli embassy in Pretoria and to suspend all diplomatic relations. The governing African National Congress, which dominates parliament, has long been critical of Israel, and it supported a motion in parliament. The motion called for the closure of the embassy and suspension of ties until Israel agrees to a ceasefire and commits to binding negotiations. In the meantime, President Cyril Ramaphosa has recently referred Israel to the International Criminal Court for potential war crimes and has recalled South Africa's diplomats from Israel. To discuss this, I'm being joined by Hermann Pretorius, Director of Communications for the South African Institute of Race Relations. It's nice to have you around, Hermann, to talk to us on this.
Thank you.
Now, how might the closure of the Israeli embassy and, of course, the suspension of diplomatic relations impact South Africa's international standing and its relations with other countries, especially those that have strong ties with Israel?
I think it is definitely a problem for South Africa to face up to. We are developing something of an inconsistent foreign policy stance. If you look at what the ANC government has positioned itself on as or said on the conflict in Ethiopia and Eritrea, or Syria, or Russia and Ukraine, versus now the situation between Israel and Palestinian forces, there is an inconsistency here where some acts that might qualify as condemnable and wrong in one sphere of foreign policy in the world might now be seen as acceptable and something that the ANC endorses on behalf of South Africa. So how it affects South Africa's standing on the world stage is definitely a question of our credibility and the consistency of our convictions, especially if we compare it to South Africa's and the ANC's response to other global situations of a similar nature. And South Africa, within the BRICS framework, faces now a problem where you have a formerly relatively neutral Russia and China on the Palestinian-Israeli question. You have Russia now making some movement towards a pro-Palestinian position, but then you have India, who is very much pro-Israel. So South Africa is now another unit of that BRICS family of nations that is making the coherence of that bloc's position more unclear, and it's not quite clear what the benefit to South Africa will be from this.
Yes, and that takes me to my next question. When we bring BRICS into the matter and the ties that South Africa has with other economic powers, now, does this now imply that this particular stance from South Africa, legislative stance from South Africa, might have economic, political, and social repercussions on the country, most especially when we look at international collaborations, we look at trade relations, we look at global alliances and partnerships that cut across the spheres of South Africa's existence? Is there going to be a problem?
I think you are quite right to flag that as an issue. South Africa's main import-export relationships are with the European Union and the United States of America. And on the issue of the Ukrainian conflict and now this Israeli-Palestinian situation, South Africa has, on the one hand, tried to pretend to be neutral.
Hello, Hermann. Okay.
Or another. Pardon me for my connection there. So the consistency of South Africa with its trading partners in America and the European Union are very much at stake. This is yet another indication or another instance of the South African government choosing ideological alignment, seeing Israel as a colonial enterprise of a similar nature to apartheid, rather than seeing the bigger picture of global trade and a global economy where South Africa must be competitive and must be linked up to the rest of the world.
Okay, so now that we see that South Africa is calling for a drag of Israel to the International Criminal Court, number one, does Israel have a case to answer at the court? And two, What does it say in terms of its alignment? I'm talking about this position or this call by South Africa with its policy objectives and commitment to international rights and the need to garner justice for those who may have been victims of this tragedy.
The question of the International Criminal Court and whether Israel has a case to answer is an immensely complex one. And I think you will have legal experts on both sides making strong arguments. Personally, I think the international legal framework still maintains a right of response and of military nature. And the events of the 7th of October certainly qualifies as a provocative action by a power into a sovereign territory. So Israel's case in the International Criminal Court, to my view, seems, if there is a case to answer, they will be able to answer it. I'm not sure what the South African government achieves by requesting this sort of International Criminal Court procedure against the Israeli Prime Minister, while they have been silent on any similar questions with regards to Vladimir Putin or to militants in the Ethiopian or Eritrean conflict, or for that matter, over the last decade in Syria, where 500,000 people were killed by the Syrian government and the conflict there. So looking towards South Africa's position on that and our mission as something of an African nation on the global stage, it jars quite significantly with the Constitution of South Africa that gives democracy more power than the bullet. And we see that in the advance of some Hamas forces into Israel, you don't see Israel being prohibitive to Arab voting or parties or curricula. So I do think South Africa is damaging its own standing and reputation.
Okay. Hermann, Pretorius, Director of Communications for the South African Institute of Race Relations. Thank you so much for your time.
A great pleasure.